All right, good morning, and thanks for coming back again for another lecture for Bible study and context. Today, we're going to be talking about Esther and the Book of Esther, and I'm going to very briefly talk about Ezra and Nehemiah, about this whole time frame that they live in, and a little bit how they're connected. So like we do in every lecture, I'm going to go ahead and start off with some Hebrew and breaking down something, because it's always very interesting, right? I think over the last 25 lectures that we found out that this is very interesting stuff, the way it breaks down and what it means and what it says about somebody outside of the surface value meaning of their name. And so here we have Hadassah. Now, you might be thinking, wait, what? I thought we were talking about Esther today. This is Esther. Just be patient. I'm going to have to walk this thing because I have a lot to say today. In the front half, you might get a little lost. I'm not going to front. You might get a little lost. Be patient. It will all make sense in the end. So let's talk about Hadassah. Her name means a myrtle, a beautiful flower. So Hadassah is reminiscent of a beautiful flower. But whenever we break it down from right to left, like we do every time, let's talk about it. Hey, it means to behold. The dalet is the path or the doorway. And samech means protection or to protect. And then hey, again, it would be behold or revealed. And so whenever Hadassah's name is broken down letter by letter that tells each part of the story, her name literally means, behold, the path of protection is revealed. And if you already know about the story of Hadassah, who they call Esther, you already know why this is exciting. You already know why this is awesome. That behold, the path of protection will be revealed. So they call her Esther, or the Book of Esther, which is very tightly related to Ishtar, or Astarte, or Semiramis, or all the many names that we've been over in the past 25 Bible studies to describe this pagan deity. And there's a reason why they call her this, and we'll get to that in a minute. But you know who also has a thing for names and titles? And switching titles with names? It's the kings of Persia. And specifically for the purpose of this lecture, I'm really only going to be talking about a few of them, but just in order real quick, these are some of them. Cyrus, Cambyses II, Darius, Xerxes, Artaxerxes I, Darius II, and Artaxerxes II. So I left two of them out on purpose because two of them only reigned for 1 year apiece. So I could care less for the purpose of this lecture. But in the first 10 words of Esther, we see that it says, now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. But we don't see an Ahasuerus anywhere in the line of Persian kings, even among the two kings that I left out of this list. So what are they talking about? You know, the non-believers will say, look, the Bible is this, it's that. They don't get it right. There's too many fouls. There's too many errors. Ahasuerus isn't even a king mentioned in Persian history. Oh, really? Let's talk about this really quick because this is important. So with Xerxes, Artaxerxes, Ahasuerus, or Darius, which are some of the kings that are mentioned throughout the Persian history, these are also titles. These are titles and names. So it can get a little confusing. And what do I mean, you might ask? Well, let's say 1,000 years from now, you hear that in 2028, the big kahuna got elected for president. You don't understand English like that. You don't understand the colloquialisms of Americana. You don't understand any of that. So you'll just go around saying to everybody, oh yeah, you know that big kahuna from 2028. And you would think that's his name. if historically it wasn't corrected. Same thing with Jito. Jito can be a name, but more specifically, Jito is actually a title of a provincial manager that was just under the shogun during feudal Japan. So Jito might not, his title might be the Jito, but Jito might not be his name. Okay, you see where I'm going with this. This is my favorite one. The same thing with Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, something most people don't know, that's not his name. His name was Temujin. Genghis Khan means great king. Okay, so we have this titles but names because when things are translated into different languages or when they're transmitted from one culture to the next, there's a lot of context that can be lost. And especially if I'm translating somebody's title as if it was their name, or if I'm translating their name as if it was their title, things can get lost in translation, especially over hundreds of years. So the Encyclopedia Britannica will help us out a little bit. It says Ahasuerus, a royal Persian name occurring throughout the Old Testament, immediately preceding Artaxerxes I in the line of Persian kings. Ahasuerus is evidently to be identified with Xerxes. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but just to go a little further to prove the point. In red here, it says Arces. Skip all the superfluous information down to, after ascending the throne as Artaxerxes I, who? Arces. But he's ascending the throne as Artaxerxes I. So do you see? And I go down to the bottom there. Following the death of Artaxerxes I, his son Artaxerxes became Xerxes II. So they're very much into flip-flopping names, to taking on different titles and names as they ascend to the throne. And so that's how Ahasuerus, as he's called in the Bible, is Xerxes, as Persian history would account for. Just to get that out of the way. And I want to talk about Ezra and Nehemiah very, very briefly. I'm not going to do an actual lecture on Ezra and Nehemiah because you can read Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther all probably in one sitting if you're a reader. And if you're not, then you could easily do it in 2 or 3 sittings. But they connect in this way. The CYRUS cylinder is the earliest written Bill of Rights. I wanted to throw this up here to just give you an idea of a little bit of insight into the ambitions of Cyrus, right? I mean, if he's writing a Bill of Rights and giving people rights or rights they can't have also, then it lets you know a little something about his leadership. And here we go. A little bit about from Ezra. It says, now in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all of his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, thus says Cyrus, the king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the Lord God of heaven has given me, and he has commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So he's a benevolent man, and he's also somebody to fear. But at the same time, it fulfilled the prophecy of Jeremiah that things would happen this way. Now, going forward, I just want to demonstrate where Ezra falls, because he mentions Cyrus, and in verse 6 he mentions Ahasuerus. Then in 7 he mentions Artaxerxes, and then in 7 of another chapter, the next chapter, he mentions Darius, but Darius comes before this. So you can see Ezra is actually kind of all over the place. He's a well, I don't know how you say chronicleizer. That's not really a word, but we'll make it a word. He's a chronicleizer. He is the one who scholars believe wrote Chronicles. He wrote Ezra and he wrote Nehemiah. He is a scribe in the law of God, which means he writes the law of God. That's how well he knows it. He's in the business of writing it down at this point, Don't forget that the children of Israel have been spread all throughout this kingdom, which is 127 provinces from India all the way to Ethiopia, and they have completely lost who they are as a people. I don't want to say their religion, because it's not a religion, it's their culture, it's their truth, it's the fact of who they are genetically and what they have been given by God. They've lost it. They all live in pagan nations now. And then in 12 in Ezra, I don't know what chapter this is, I should have put it up there, we get to where Ezra falls. Where does he actually have his experience? It's at Artaxerxes, when the King of Kings writes to Ezra the priest, a scribe of the law of the God of heaven, perfect peace, and so forth. And then it describes the letter that was written. So Ezra is talking about these guys. He's accounting for this time period, but his actual experience through the book of Ezra and what happens during the book of Nehemiah is during Artaxerxes. So you see, Cyrus, we have the declaration. Cyrus had it in his heart that he should send them back to build the temple because God put it in his heart. Darius actually later has to go and find that declaration because he needs to clarify, because there's a lot of beef about it. Like, oh, these people who have been here before and have built this temple to their God, who defied other kings, who came into the land and slaughtered everybody and took over, you want to allow them to rebuild? And there's like beef about this for a long time. It goes on from pretty much from Cyrus until Artaxerxes. Then during the time of Xerxes, we have Esther. That's where that happens. And then during Artaxerxes the first, we have Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, so Nehemiah was also a cupbearer for Artaxerxes, so he's very close to him. Now, Nehemiah is a builder guy. Okay, Ezra's a scribe guy. And it fulfills what Daniel 9:25 said when you're reading through Nehemiah, which you will do if you really want to know. It's confirmed, and it says, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times." And when you read Nehemiah, you'll see exactly how troubled the times are when they're trying to rebuild the wall. And that might seem completely like, why are you talking about this during the lecture for Esther? What happens during the reign of Xerxes, while Hadassah is his queen, is what emboldens and empowers Ezra and Nehemiah and that whole situation to have so much encouragement and to have so much hope and to have so much power behind what they are accomplishing because of what happens in Esther. And so from Cyrus until Artaxerxes, we're looking at about 134-year time span. And so it's highly unlikely that Ezra was living through the king of time, through the kingship of Cyrus, all the way through Artaxerxes. It's possible, but it's just not very likely. Okay. Here is an archaeological site of King Cyrus's tomb, and then the tomb of Artaxerxes, which is a lot like the Edomite structures from Mount Seir. Remember, they were living in the clefts of the rock, like the Bible said. And so let's go ahead and get back to Hadassah, who is called Esther. And so that we can behold how the path of protection is revealed. So in Esther 1, we see that King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, calls Vashti, his queen, to come into this presence of all the people and the officials so that she could show off her beauty. And she says no. not really something you want to do to the king, to tell him no. So this sets off a series of events to where now he's looking for a new queen. And so they bring all of these virgins to the palace to go through 12 months of training so that they can learn how to be around the king and around his place and how to conduct themselves, okay? So in Esther 2, it says, and Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither a father or a mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it's really her older cousin that is there to take care of her. And they're insinuating here that if, we haven't gotten to that part yet, but I just want you to take note. This says Hadassah, that is Esther. And here we go. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. So Mordecai is more than likely the one who told her to stylize herself as Esther. Why? Because this would appeal to the king. And especially in certain historical writings, you will find that Xerxes considered himself a god king. And I think they talk about that in a few movies even. So it would make sense to try to appeal to him if he's trying to choose a wife, appeal to him with the name of their pagan goddess, right? God king goes with the goddess queen, even though it's all pagan deity. Mordecai knows how to help Esther survive this situation, or Hadassah. So then it goes on to say that the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. And so he set the royal crown upon her head and made her the queen instead of Vashti. So in those days, while Mordecai sat within the gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, they were doorkeepers. They became furious, and they sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus, who is Xerxes. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made of the matter, it was confirmed, and both of them were hung on the gallows. So now we have Mordecai intercepting an assassination attempt. And then Haman rises to ranks, okay? Haman is going to be the main problem throughout the book. And Haman goes around and he tries to get everybody to bow down to him and to show him favor. You know, oh, we love you, Haman. We bow to you. And they want, and bowing is a form of worship. You don't prostrate yourself down to anybody but God. And it's the children of Israel who told the Gentile nations about God. So of course this is their way, if they are still living by their way. And this is Mordecai. He's saying no. Mordecai never bows down to Haman once. And it starts to drive Haman absolutely crazy. And he hates it. He hates Mordecai. Haman hates Mordecai. And so he pleads with the king to destroy these people. You say, these people, what do you mean? Mordecai is only one man. Well, just wait for it. Remember Ezra, chapter 6, verse 6. I should have put the chapter up there again, forgive me. But it says, in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. So Ezra's reminding the reader of Book of Ezra about what Haman is about to do. And it says a copy of the document in Esther 3, a copy of the document was to be issued as a law that in every province being published for all of the people, that they should be ready for that day. What day is that? Well, it's a day when Haman convinced the king that everybody get together and kill all of the children of Israel, or anybody at that time that they would consider to be Jewish. And this is, I have an issue with that word. So, but these are the children of Israel that is spread out across the provinces, that they should all be killed. Esther 3. But he disdained to lay his hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all of the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. He wanted to kill all of them, not just Mordecai. So we're talking, don't forget, we're talking about this whole place right here. This is a very big landmass. So basically, Haman wants to be the first Hitler. That's what he wants. Haman wants to be the first Hitler. He wants to eradicate all of the Jews in the province from east to west. And so whenever Mordecai hears about it, he goes to the gate and he starts to tear his clothes. He starts to cover himself in dirt and ashes, and he starts to basically protest. He's basically protesting. But Mordecai does reveal the entire plan to Esther, because remember, Esther's name is Hadassah. She is a child from the tribes of Israel, and she would technically be included in this plan. And so in Esther 4, it says, and this is Mordecai speaking to Esther, for if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And that's so true. Even just in everybody's life, you might not become the queen to some king and all this and that, but yet who knows whether you have come to this earth for such a time as this? Keep that in the back of your head, because it's literally true for every individual on earth. If you're seeking the path of God, you're going to find your purpose. And so there's this rule, right? That in Persia, you're not allowed to approach the king. You cannot come and approach the king unless you are summoned, not even the queen. But in Vashti's case, she was summoned and she still didn't even come. I don't know, maybe she was scared. Maybe she was just feeling herself too much. Who knows? But she didn't come. So Esther has this issue where she really needs to get in the king's ear so she can talk to him. But she hasn't seen this guy for 30 days. He's been doing king stuff, hanging out. So to really get in his ear, she just needs to go to him. But she could be put to death for it. But she goes, and the king holds out his golden scepter to her. And what that does is clarify that she's welcome and that she's not going to be put to death. And Esther 5 tells us that the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What's your request? It shall be given to you, up to half of the kingdom." So the king is so happy to see her, he doesn't care that she broke the rules. You know, he really, really loves her. He's willing to give her half of the kingdom. That's his way of letting her know, like, don't be afraid to come in here to me, ever. Don't you ever be afraid to come to me, because I'm going to give you up to half of the kingdom anytime you ask for it. So what's up? And basically the conversation goes like this. Yo, I'm going to make a brunch for us. So bring your boy. And he's like, who? And she's like, Haman. So now it's not looking real good. It's not looking good for Haman. And this is kind of where it starts. Because he's plotting to kill Mordecai and all of his people, which includes Esther, which just so happens to be the queen. And Haman does not know that yet. So in Esther 5, it says, then, and this is talking about Haman, Haman's wife Zeresh and all of his friends, they said to him, let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it, and then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, And so he had the gallows made. So basically, he cannot stand seeing Mordecai every time he goes to and fro from his house to the palace, because Mordecai's hanging out by the gate. And all of his friends just tell him, all right, just kill him. Why don't you just hang him where everybody can see it? If you don't know what a gallows is, this is a gallows where they used to hang all the pirates and all that kind of stuff. And that's what they want to do to Mordecai. But unfortunately for Haman, the king is sitting around one day and he's just not feeling it. It's not a good day for him. And so he has some of the eunuchs come in and read to him the chronicles of his experience as king, where they just kind of read to him a list of all the awesome things that he's done. Well, it's almost like looking through a scrapbook. And they start reading all of the things to King Cyrus, and it gets to the part in their chronicles where it describes Mordecai saving him from assassination. And he remembers and he says, I don't think I ever honored this guy or even said thank you. And he asks Haman, what would you do for a guy that I want to honor? Well, what would you think? And so Haman actually believes that he wants to honor him. But instead, the king tells Haman to go and honor Mordecai, the Jew, in the way that Haman sees fit to be honored. So basically, Haman has to put Mordecai on the king's horse, clothed in the king's robe, and he has to bring him all through the town, all through the city, and tell everybody, this is the great Mordecai, after he just planned to kill him. Now, there might not be a better example in the whole Bible of God touching somebody's heart and somebody's mind the night before something happens to save somebody's life so that something even greater can happen down the line of his life. This is amazing. If the king didn't get bored and sad that night, he wouldn't have been read the chronicles of his leadership, and he wouldn't have been reminded of Mordecai, and Mordecai would have been hung. But there was intervention. When God has a plan, nothing can stop God's plan. And so, what a twist. Now, here we are. They've went through a couple of dinner parties already, and Esther gets them to come back to 2 dinner parties with Haman and the king. And she does it. It hits the fan. She does the unthinkable, and she throws Haman under the bus at the banquet in front of the king and reveals his plan. She reveals herself, and she reveals Mordecai, that they're all Jews, and that Haman's trying to kill all the Jews, which is her and her people. So the king translates that into his brain. Oh, so Haman's trying to kill my wife? That's basically what happens. And so the guards come in. They cover his face, the Bible says. So really, they put a black bag over his head. One of the eunuchs comes and says, Harbona, one of the eunuchs says to the king, look, there's the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf. It's standing at the house of Haman. So then the king said to hang him on it. Wow. You might have a Haman in your life right now. You might have somebody trying to crucify you for nothing, hang you out to dry for nothing, ship you up creek for no reason, stab you in the back, however you want to say it. But take note here. When God has a plan, your enemies will hang on their own gallows if you stay close to God. And then in Esther 8, it says the king took off his signet ring, which he had given to Haman, and he gives it to Mordecai. And then he appoints Mordecai over the house of Haman. Wow. Wow. So Haman hated him, wanted to kill him, instead shoots himself in the face, basically. He gets hung on his own gallows, and now Mordecai is given his house. And in the last 25 lectures, we've been over what a signet ring is. The signet ring is basically a stamp or a seal of approval. You know, you could smash it into some hot wax, or you smash it into some wet clay and then it dries on the tablet, however they want to use it. But it's basically signed, sealed, delivered. That's what the signet ring says. And he's given this to Mordecai. So now Mordecai is being given power. That is power. Mordecai can write something down. Hey, I get free ice cream for the next 5 years. Stamp it with his signet ring, and that's a law. It's not a suggestion. It's a law when something is made by the ring. And that's why the king can't take back the declaration saying to kill all the Jews on the day that Haman has appointed. The king, he can't take that back. It's a law now, sealed with the ring. But let's take note that he gave Haman a ring too. And so he says in verse 8, you yourselves should write a decree concerning the Jews, as you please, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke. So what do? They want to seal it that the Jews can defend themselves at all costs from this craziness. And Mordecai writes it down in every single language of every single province, and he sends it with these horses that are bred for speed. And the Bible tells us, thus the Jews defeated all of their enemies with the stroke of the sword, with the slaughter and destruction, and did what they pleased with those who hated them. And then it goes on to say, then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do against tomorrow according to today's decree. And then Haman's 10 sons shall also be hanged on the gallows. And that's what we have right here. Even Haman's 10 sons got it the same way he did. So you have to be, look, do not talk bad about God's people. Don't try to come against God's people. It won't end well. I mean, you might get away with it for a little while, but at the end of the day, don't do it, okay? So thus all the Jews defeated their enemies by the sword. And that's really how the path of protection is revealed. Remember Hadassah's name. Behold, the path of protection is revealed. If Esther or Hadassah didn't become the queen, we would probably have no Bible. It would have been destroyed along with the people, because they didn't just have the Bible floating around back then full of all of the books that had been written up until that time. They had lost most of that stuff, and that's why Ezra is able to write it down. First, he has the knowledge, and second, they've become emboldened, because remember, Ezra and Nehemiah happened during the kingship after this era. And so all of this emboldens them. Remember, she said, hey, let the people of Shushan do tomorrow exactly what they did today. Let them rise up against the people that are trying to attack them. Yeah, cool. But that whole tomorrow, tomorrow is a pretty big statement. Tomorrow can be stretched pretty far into the future. And that's why they're able to defend themselves while they're building the wall in Nehemiah, okay? And all of this emboldens them. Not only do they have King Cyrus during his time declaring that they can rebuild, but then during the time of Ahasuerus, you have Mordecai sending out official decrees signed and sealed with the king's ring that the Jews are allowed to protect themselves, and they're allowed to, you know, come against anybody who's trying to come against them. Only God could orchestrate these kinds of things. And that's why the empirical powers throughout history have tried to destroy these people and the truth and the words. Now, out of this situation, we get Purim, which literally means lots, and sometimes known as the Feast of Lots. It's the Jewish holiday in which Jews commemorate being saved from persecution in the ancient Persian Empire. Now, shouldn't a Christian also be celebrating this? Without this, I don't think Ezra gets the protection that he needs and the confidence and the empowerment and the hope that he needs to reinstate the Torah to the people. This is a very serious situation. All could have been lost, just like all could have been lost when they were in Egypt. So we get Purim out of this whole situation. The history of Purim comes, Feast of Lots comes from here. Okay. Now, a quick breakdown about all this information that I just threw at you. I know it was a lot. This is one of probably the most word-heavy lectures we've done. So we have Vashti refuses Ahasuerus. Then Esther gets exalted as the queen. Mordecai saves the king from assassination. Haman desires to kill the Israelites in all the provinces. Then Esther reveals herself and her people to the king. Mordecai is saved from Haman. Mordecai writes a law into existing, allowing the Israelites in the provinces of Persia to protect themselves. Purim is born. And just for your knowledge, some awesome stuff you can look more into later. In the 1930s, archaeologists working on the site excavated, and I believe this is in the capital, which is in Iran, but you can look it up more and correct me if I'm wrong. Archaeologists working on the site excavated thousands of official records in the form of small clay tablets. These tablets are known as the Persepolis Administrative Archives, or simply the Persepolis texts. The records make reference to an official named Mordecai, or Marduk, who served both Darius the Great and Xerxes the First, known in the Bible as Ahasuerus. So Marduk and Marduk are likely variations of the name Mordecai. These records confirm that there was an official or officials with the name of Mordecai during the reign of Ahasuerus. Further, one of the records even places Mordecai in Shushan, where the events of the Book of Esther take place. There's some extra biblical information for you, and if you know any non-believers that need a little more push and encouragement to come to the source of how we can understand our relationship with God, there it is. There's another little piece of the pie. And that's her. That's the amazing, the beautiful, the myrtle Hadassah, who is Esther. That great path of protection that's revealed.